This is Altogether and CMS's 3 Things to Scale Up Your Business event. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope it's going to be a really exciting conversation. It's focused around Altogether's 3 Things framework. So we ask each of our really exceptional guests, that I will let Katie tell you a little more about later, but we ask each of them for their 3 really actionable pieces of advice across each of their specific topics, and we will then delve into those with a panel discussion. So first, I should say a huge thank you to our partners CMS for co-hosting this event with us, especially to Katie, who will be our chair. This event is in celebration of International Women's Day, and whilst that is close to my heart and many hearts here, this is not just an event for women by women. This is an event for everyone, because I think it's important that whilst we celebrate some really phenomenal businesswomen, we have a very rounded conversation on this, and we invite everyone to be part of the discussion. So just 1 minute spiel on Altogether. We are a not-for-profit social enterprise. We were founded at the start of the pandemic in order to help small business CEOs survive. So we feel that we've moved on slightly from there, and we now help businesses to thrive beyond that. So the CEOs, founders, leaders of small businesses will come to Altogether for pro bono advice with some leading experts for events such as these, or for advice-based content. So if you're running a small business, please do keep us in mind. Just to note that this will be recorded so that we can share content after the event. And finally, I'm going to hand you over to Katie Nagy de Nagybaczon. Thank you, Katie.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Great, so many of you joining us is Katie Nagy de Nagybaczon, and I'm an M&A partner at CMS. Really excited to be hosting this panel today. I think we're going to get lots of interesting and practical tips from our speakers. I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. CMS is an international law firm. We have over 70 offices in over 40 jurisdictions, but we really love helping founders grow their businesses, as well as advising all our international clients. We have a dedicated startup program, Equip, which supports fast-growing businesses as they scale by providing discounted legal advice, networking opportunities, introductions and other value-added services. And I head our Lead Hers campaign, which specifically supports the growth of female founders and aims to drive change in the startup ecosystem to make it a more diverse place. This year's International Women's Day theme is Breaking the Bias, and IWD calls for us to imagine a world free of bias, stereotypes and discrimination. The 4 fantastic women that we're going to hear from today each have challenged stereotypes in their careers so far, and they're going to share with us their top 3 lessons. Having come through 2 years of challenging times with COVID, and then being faced with the really terrible invasion of Ukraine, we understand that now more than ever the importance of looking after yourself, looking after your team, maintaining balance and really building that resilience, and some of those topics we're going to touch on today. We'll be opening up the session for live Q&A later on, and we'd really love to hear from you. So please start submitting your questions and comments via the Q&A box as early as possible during the session, and then I'll try and put as many of those questions as I can to our panel at the end of the session. So let me move on by introducing our guests. So first we're going to hear from Joanna Swash, CEO and founder of Moneypenny, and she's going to share her 3 things on building a cohesive and effective leadership team. Sadly, Joanna couldn't join us live today, so she's pre-recorded her message for us. Then we're going to hear live from Emma Woods, Chairwoman, NED and former CEO of Wagamama, sharing her 3 things for building inclusive cultures. After Emma, we're going to hear from Daina Spedding, partner investor at BGF, sharing her 3 things on successfully financing your scale up, which is, I know, a topic close to the heart of many of the people who are going to be listening into this session. And then finally, Nadia Manzoor, founder at The U Effect and former partner at SW Mitchell Capital, sharing her 3 things on building the change you want to see. Then Emma, Daina and Nadia are going to join me for a panel discussion touching on some of the topics they will have covered, and also we'll have a chance to put your questions to them. So let's kick off by hearing from Joanna about her 3 things.
Hello, I'm Joanna Swash. I'm CEO of Moneypenny, based here in Wrexham. As a business, we've grown really rapidly over the years, both here in the UK and from our American offices too. And we have a reputation for being a real people-centric business where people are the absolute heart of everything we do. And that's actually why our clients buy into us. We are looking after telephone calls and live chats for so many brands, so many businesses, both sides of the Atlantic. My message for the next generation of female business leaders is, if you can learn one thing from everything that you do, mistakes, imperfections and all, then actually it's been well worth the experience. Even being in the room and listening to somebody talking for a whole day, if you've learned something else that you can actually take back to your daily life, then that's all well and good. So what is that one thing every day that we can all learn and actually be better at? I'm going to share 3 things actually that are really important to me that hopefully help you to scale your business. The first one, you are not the company. Lose that ego and remember the power of we and the power really of diverse thinking. Today's leaders are those who will actually take us into the future with them, who will embrace the people around them and lead by example with an open, honest, very transparent approach, making sure that everybody who is there in the business with them can realise their full potential. And I really think it's the rise of the softer skills. It's about getting people on your bus, isn't it? And moving forward as a team. Look at Good to Great by Jim Collins and the importance of the mission statement. It's an authentic understanding of what you can be the best at and focusing on achieving it. And to me, that's really, really important, that statement. We all need to be the best that we can be, and we all need to be encouraging others along the way. And I think we've all got a real responsibility. I can look back through my career and think, who are those people that have helped me, that give me that helping hand along the way? And I really do believe that it's our responsibility as leaders of any gender, go and help those people that are around you and be that person that in 20 years time they actually remember. At Moneypenny, we really do believe it's about nurturing that individual team member's talent, fostering their uniqueness. And if we can do that for those people that we're surrounded with on a daily basis, then actually haven't we all got a much better business as a result? My second point is transparency. I alluded to it there. We need to ensure that everyone's clear on their goals, that they've got clarity about what they're going to achieve. Not only that, it's the transparency of being able to make a mistake, feeling safe and secure. Yes, we've all got clear objectives, but things go wrong, and let's all be honest and open and transparent when it does, and let's make sure that we can support each other. In the past, if we've ever had lack of alignment, then that's when things go wrong, when we've got siloed conversations happening, when we've got different people with different agendas. That actually stops all our growth, doesn't it? It stops our personal growth, it stops our business growth, and it stops us from being able to help out our colleagues and help other people. So for me, let's share the good, the bad and the ugly. Let's have those conversations that sometimes are quite difficult, but don't put them off. Be transparent. Be an open style of leader. I remember the first time I actually came into Moneypenny, I had my own business for a while and I needed a proper job for a bit. And Ed and Rachel, our founders, at that time said, we are a really people-centric business. And I don't think until I'd really experienced the business young, and there was only 20 of us then, and actually there's 1,200 people now within Moneypenny. It's incredible growth. I never believed that was really possible. And I have experienced that people-centric approach both 17 years ago when I first started, and I would hope every single day in all of our 3 locations now, and that is absolutely critical. That comes from transparency, that comes from honest, open leadership, and that comes from giving people space to fail. My third point, purpose. We all need to have a clear purpose. We need to have our own personal purpose and be very clear about what that is. And also of the business as well. Why do we do what we do? What is our purpose? What are we all aiming for? In scaling a business, I think we can all look at so many different organisations who've actually failed at that, retaining that common sense of purpose. If they've scaled, it's been lost. It gets drowned out by process and drowned out by doing different kind of things for different reasons. Let's all remain true to our purpose. What are we here to do? How are we supposed to be delighting ourselves, delighting our customers, delighting each other as team members? It really is at the heart of strategy. It's the heart of culture and the heart of our corporate identity, no matter how big your business gets or is, or maybe it's a startup, or it might have been around for absolutely donkey's years. Know your purpose and stick to it. And finally, just be resilient. It's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. It's actually being able to admit to them at the time, look at yourself, look at your own behaviours, look at the behaviours of those around you, have an environment where it's okay to be honest and to be able to share and to be able to help each other be the very, very best versions of ourselves.
So now we're going to hear from Emma on her 3 things, please, Emma.
Okay, hello everyone. It's great to be here. I mean, I think the first, I'm following Joanna, and I think both of us are really talking about culture. And then the second half of the presentation is really going to be on more important other things, which are very important, like funding. But I'm going to kind of continue the theme on culture, and it's something I feel really passionate about. That if you want to build a growing company, you have to build, and there's a deliberate emphasis on the build, an inclusive culture. And if I'm really honest, I didn't understand that for the first half of my career. I worked in a fantastic organisation called Unilever, which was obsessed with customers, really obsessed. And I learned lots and lots of things there, but it wasn't as obsessed about culture. And at least when I was working there, and then it took me going to work in Latin America, where you don't get anything done unless you think about how you deliver through people, and then working in amazing people-centric businesses, a bit like the one Joanna's talked about, but like Wagamama. And I now really passionately believe that the multiplier for growth businesses is caring very much about your customer, but also caring very much about building an inclusive culture. So if you can think about that, customer and culture. I suspect lots of you who are business leaders probably do this second nature. I've seen some fantastic examples of great cultures in small businesses. So please forgive me if you think that there's nothing new in here. But I'm going to talk about 3 things. My 3 things are: you have to prioritize as a task designing your culture as you grow. So in the way that you think about cash flows, in the way you think about your business reputation, you should be thinking about culture. And why is that? Because culture is what will get you out your teams out of bed in the morning. It's also, and we've seen it during COVID, or I saw it a lot in COVID, a fantastic culture is what ensures people give discretional effort when times are tough. And in small businesses, there are often times when things are a bit unpredictable, and that's when you need your teams to really lean in and say, put their hand up and say, I really want to help. So what does designing culture mean? Well, for me, what it's meant has been spending time codifying what your culture actually is, because everybody's culture is different, and what the ingredients are and why that's special. And then thinking about how can we kind of nurture those ingredients. That's in terms of who we bring in, who we recruit, but it's also in terms of the rhythms and routines that you have in your business that might be celebrating the culture. And I suppose what I would say to you as small business leaders is it has to come from you. It has to be authentic. Don't feel you have to have the culture of Billy Bob down the road. It's your culture. And you will need to put a bit of energy into this. If you can afford to have a really good HR lead, they might help you, but there are lots of companies that can also help you do this. We can perhaps talk in the Q&A about it. So have it on your board agendas. Do not take it for granted. Spend time designing your culture. So that's the first thing. My second point is I think it concerns the why of why diversity and inclusion is so important. I suppose what I would really encourage you to do is to treat it like a tick box HR exercise. My son is a big fan. My 17-year-old son is a massive fan of the US series of The Office. I don't know if there's anyone on the call who's watched the US series of The Office, but episode 2 of series 1 is called Diversity Day. And it's probably worth watching. You can watch it as a YouTube clip, but it is really quite funny watching Steve Carell try to be politically correct and makes so many gaffes. And I think that's one of the things that's happened with diversity and inclusion is people think of it as an HR exercise. Throughout my career, whenever I've worked in teams where there are more sorts of different people, whether that's race, actually culture, in Unilever and international teams, they're very good at this, experience, what happens is that the more difference there is in a team, the more everybody feels comfortable and gives of their whole self. So the bottom line is, if you want to get performance from outperformance, which is what growth is about, from your teams, you need people rocking up and giving of their whole selves. And they do that because they feel safe. You know, if they feel safe, if we feel psychologically safe, we don't activate the fight or flight mechanism. And that's really why inclusion is so important. That's what inclusion gives you. So what does that mean for you in practice as you're growing your businesses? I mean, don't have things like diversity days. You might want to have inclusion committees, but I would, who support diversity. I think it's about you thinking as you recruit people about recruiting different sorts of people. Do not just recruit in your likeness. So that's my third piece of advice. But to bring that home, please watch the second episode of The Office. You'll enjoy it. And then the third and final piece of advice really is about, well, how do you know if you've got happy and fulfilled teams and you've got this great inclusive culture? And this is really simple. You have to ask them, and you have to ask them in a way that is that they can honestly tell you. So you sitting around and going, hey, tell me how everyone's feeling is not going to work. But doing whilst we all hate email surveys, there's some really good people like Culture Amp who do really good pulse surveys. And so I would encourage you, the best businesses I've worked in have kind of periodic check-ins with their team. Team know they're coming, they're asked to participate, often they're badged in a way. In Merlin Entertainments, where I work, we had this fantastic survey called The Wizard Wants to Know, because we were about entertainments. And, you know, we all over the business, there were posters saying, you know, this is what the wizard wants to know, the survey's coming, and then the individual posters saying what people had said and what was being done. You know, there was a real sort of emphasis on the survey. In Wagamama, our internal employee proposition was Be You Be Wagamama. So the internal survey was called Be You Be Heard. So I would just really encourage you to find ways as you grow of talking to your teams, and being prepared to go out and talk to them when you think, actually, I don't know the answer. So I had an experience when George Floyd was murdered and the Black Lives Matter movement happened. And I just thought, I don't really understand what my team are feeling about it. And we did a survey very, very quickly. And actually, I had thought our organisation was fantastic in terms of inclusion, but discovered that some people felt that we were actually had some problem areas. Actually to do with the way customers were treating staff, and we weren't facing into a sort of an anti-racist policy towards our staff. And I only found that out because I surveyed the 6,000 people at that moment. And I chose to do that because if I'd waited to the annual survey, the moment would have passed. So those are my three things. They're not rocket science. I expect you're sitting there thinking, I know these. But nurture your culture like you nurture your P&L. Do not take it for granted. Have it on your board agenda. That's point number one. As you build your teams, ensure they are diverse. Do not think of diversity and inclusion like a training exercise from the US series of The Office. And the third one is take regular independent temperature checks of how people are feeling and be prepared to listen to them and act on them. That's it.
Thank you, Emma. I love the fact that you did the roundup, because there's a lot of content there. So distilling that down into your sound bites is brilliant. Thank you. So now we're going to turn to Daina, and you're going to give us a slightly different perspective, coming from someone who works a lot with investors. And I know investment and fundraising is a topic that we get asked about all the time. It is so important for fast-growing businesses. So looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Daina.
Hi everyone, and thank you for having me. So I guess I'm keen to share some insights in terms of how to think like an investor and how to improve access to finance and funding as you scale the business. And I don't think that actually anything I'll share will be rocket science, but hopefully will resonate with quite a few founders who have tried to raise and I guess overcome challenges over the journeys you have had. And I guess the first thing, how I think about it when I have countless meetings with new companies and founders every week, every month, is in the first, I guess, 10 minutes when you meet somebody and they pitch the business to you, you try to figure out, does this business have secret sauce? And what I call secret sauce, it actually doesn't need to be rocket science, but I think every company has to figure out what is special or unique about it. And there needs to be some level of barrier to entry that makes it difficult for others to do what you're doing. Sometimes it is deep tech, intellectual property that a rival business would have to kind of invent from scratch. But often it's actually something much less tangible. It could be simply really good customer service or ability to create really engaging content without having massive marketing budget. And I guess when you look at business differences between businesses which get launched but don't scale and are often almost run as a lifestyle business and don't become big and funded, versus those which do scale and attract funding, I do think that often it's down not just to the ambitiousness of the founding team, but their ability to figure out how do we prioritize and what we'll focus on and what we'll do kind of better than others. And I guess as an example to kind of bring it to life, one of the businesses I backed last year is LV, and they have really, I think, broken through the taboos and been able to attract funding whilst operating in a femtech sector, which has been historically underfunded. And how they have managed to do it is by really figuring out what their secret sauce is. Their mission is essentially to empower women through radical female-first technology. And that message, and I guess purpose, which I know other speakers mentioned before, which I completely agree with, really resonates with a wide audience. And I know many women around the world who actually have never even bought LV's products yet they know that LV exists. They really resonate with what they're building and have really built that community, which I think is just really important. So that was my first thing, secret sauce. The second thing is actually, I call it sustainable growth plan. Of course, I guess everybody would know that you need to have a financial objectives and plan in any kind of investor pitch. But from my perspective, it's really important for this plan to be sustainable. And what I mean with sustainable is that not only it needs to be realistic and include, yes, financial objectives, but I do think it's very important that there is also a purpose and vision and a set of values which drive strategy and decision making. And any successful business, I think, has to think about what impact it creates on its customers, employees, environment, and wider community as it scales up. And we see it every day now that more and more investors would include ESG criteria in their investment decision-making process. So I almost think businesses who think about finance first and don't think about wider set of values and purpose and impact they're creating are actually shooting themselves in the foot and will probably have more limited access to finance as they scale. And again, to bring this to life, one of the companies I look after at our end at BGF is Gusto, where we have, I think, participated in 9 funding rounds and backed business when initially it was doing only 10 million revenue, and now they are significantly bigger. And what has been so encouraging to see is that, yes, they have been on hyper growth journey for many years in a row, yet they have put the purpose and the value set at the core of what they are building. So they have become big corp. Their core, I guess, mission is to be the most loved way how to have dinner. And in terms of cutting food waste, investing in recycled packaging, keeping its customers and employees happy, have really been core values and almost criteria which drives decision making. And then, yes, growth comes from the customers being happy, employees being happy, and what Em mentioned previously, really, I guess, employees going far above and beyond, even when times get tough or when COVID hits and we can't actually fulfill orders because we are seeing such high demand. That's so important, where basically if you have a sustainable growth plan, you can create that value over longer term rather than shoot for, I don't know, doubling revenues as quickly as possible. So that was my second thing. And the last thing, I think what is really important, and I think often almost underestimated, is really storytelling ability of the founding team. And I think there needs to be a very good balance between, yes, self-confidence, but more importantly, authenticity. Because when you not just pitch to investors, I think any investor looking at the business opportunities, they need to believe that you can actually sell and pitch and tell their story, not just to other investors, but also to your customers, suppliers, being able to attract talent and recruit and retain employees, to find business partnerships, to grow your business, talk to press, I mean, you name it. That ability to tell your story, and I think some of it can be coached and learned, I think is really important. And again, to give the example, one of the businesses, again, I backed last 18 months is this, which is alternative meat brand. And when you look at the creativeness of their marketing content without actually having very high budget, and authenticity, how they really have managed to cut through the noise on social media in terms of what they're building. They're not trying to say that actually eating meat is bad or preaching to kind of hardcore vegans or vegetarians. What they're really trying to do is educating, obviously, how great or tasty their products are, and making, I guess, encouraging people to eat less meat, because it's not just better for planet, it's better for health, and it helps everyone. But they do it in a very, I think, authentic manner, which is not, yes, you always, I guess, alienate some people, but I think what they have built, it's almost intersection of this storytelling ability and secret sauce in terms of brand tone of voice, which is quite unique in terms of, in terms of what I have seen elsewhere. So that was my three things, and hope it resonates with some of the founders who are listening and your own journeys when you are looking to scale and attract funding.
Thank you, Daina. That's great, and so interesting to hear it from the perspective of, you know, what's the investor looking for, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in the panel discussion. Do you keep thinking of questions and asking them? If you have a look at the top of your Teams screen, you'll see there's a specific Q&A button, which is where we'd like your questions to go, please, rather than in the chat. But finally, last but not least, we're going to have Nadia talking about her three things.
Thanks, Katie. So I guess for me, my journey, we're on quite a different stage to the other founders. I'm just starting out on this journey, but I've worked in and with big companies, and I think whether you're starting a company or working within one, my first and most important learning by far is to really look after yourself, because most of us are incredibly focused on the business, on the career, and all of our energy just pours into the building. And if you have a family too, then between the business and the kids, there's nothing left for you. And I've just seen so many people burn out, and if you burn out, then you're not going to be scaling anything. So you have to take really good care of yourself. And this is going to look really different to different people, but the tool that I would recommend is to carve out 10 minutes of every day just for yourself. And if you can do longer, that's amazing. But at the very least, I think you have to commit to making this time non-negotiable, because it's so easy to say, oh, you know what, something more important's come up. And so I try and have kind of a routine. So I find setting my alarm 10 minutes earlier and doing this in the morning is the way that works best for me. And in that 10 minutes, you just have to make sure it's time that is just for you, that's not related to the business, to the family. Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's watching some rubbish TV, maybe it's exercising, having a bath. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's just something that's going to be all about nourishing you. And I think it seems soft and conceptual, but if we don't look after ourselves, then the businesses just aren't going anywhere. And this is actually what my whole thing, the You Effect, is about. So if any of you are interested in hearing more on that, just let me know. My second thing is really all about prioritizing. So I'm starting a company at the moment, and my to-do list is never ending. I mean, literally, it's just, I know you probably know the feeling. There's always something that you can be doing. And I personally find it really overwhelming. So I think it really helps to spend the time to work out what's really important for the business at the stage that you're in. So I suggest having quarterly meetings with your C-suite where you kind of take the time to think through and set your priorities for that quarter. And then every Monday morning, have a meeting or a call where you realign on what you need to prioritize. And that's kind of within the broader priority list, but it's just trying to give yourself much more focus. So, I like to ask things like, what can I do this week to bring me closer to my goal? It really helps when I feel like I'm drowning in things, because there is always 100 things to do, just giving myself that focus. And, I know lots of places have team meetings, but how much do we structure those meetings around our priorities as a business? For me, kind of that prioritization gives what I'm doing much more focus. And again, I think it helps a lot with staying away from that danger zone of burnout. My third thing actually kind of touched a bit on what both Joe and Emma were saying. It's really about investing in a good team. You have to have good people around you. Invest your capital in a strong team. A business is only as good as the people in it. And actually, I was speaking to a big VC investor recently, and he said the biggest mistake by far that he sees in startups is that small businesses just don't spend enough money on getting the right people from day one. And I totally get it, because I'm in this boat. However much capital you have, money always feels short in startup life. It just does. And sometimes it feels that getting 5 quite good people on the team is better than getting one sort of super exceptional one. Or sometimes you don't hire for a role at all because you think, you know what, I can do that job until we generate enough revenue to hire somebody. But it's getting the right people that's going to help you to generate that revenue. Hiring average people is only going to cost you more in the longer term. And if you're doing too much yourself, it's not sustainable, it's not scalable. So allocate budget and time to finding the best people you can. And once you have those great people, make sure you delegate to them. That's one that's always been tricky for me. Trust them to let go of control. And secondly, look after them. And again, this is, I really love what Emma was saying on this, because we think about paying people in bonuses, but to me, just as if not more important is thinking about your firm's values and your approach to well-being, pastoral care. If you have good people who you look after, then you're going to have a much better chance at scaling. So I've got kind of look after yourself, prioritize, and invest in a good team, and then look after them. So that's my 3 things, Katie.
Thank you. And I think what's really interesting about what the 3 of you have said, and Joanna as well, is there are some really, really strong themes, and we didn't influence what you were going to say and what you were going to pick as your 3 things, but there are some consistent themes around what you've said, talking about purpose and authenticity, talking about teams, diversity, kind of how you grow sustainably, which obviously kind of ties into looking after yourself, and that key point about making sure that you're focusing on the right things at the right time. So some really lovely kind of consistent themes around your messages. I wanted to, I suppose, looking at kind of the journey of the business almost, I wanted to start with purpose, because I think that's a really interesting concept. And this idea, Daina, that you raised about finding your secret sauce. what I wanted to ask is, where you said, businesses need to find the way they succeed is to find their secret sauce. What is it that makes them different to other businesses? If you think you've identified your secret sauce, does that then become the main part of your story, or is it something you do? Do you publicize your secret sauce to everyone, or is it something you just execute? And I suppose that goes to sort of purpose as well. How much does purpose have to be at the forefront of your messaging about your business, or is it something that you look at internally? I wanted to start with you on that, Daina.
Sure. I actually think that obviously when you are in a startup, everything is very informal. You are like running it with mates. Everybody can communicate very easily and everybody is on the same page. But as you scale, you need to start to delegate, and there inevitably will be conversations where you're no longer in the room. And then I think it's extremely important to actually write that purpose down and communicate so that everybody in your team know what you're actually building and what matters. And when they need to do almost micromanagement and decision making on an everyday basis, they can actually decide what to prioritize based on that common purpose. And of course, it's also important to, with time, publish it publicly and basically communicate it to customers. But I think as a starting point, it's super important that everybody in your organization, and it's not just executive management team or board, I actually think that literally everybody in the organization needs to know what the purpose of the business is and what is this secret sauce, how do we want to be, what do we want to be best at?
And so, Emma, coming to you, if your purpose changes, how do you think you kind of communicate that? Because I think, you might be starting out your business, and we see this a lot with the startups that we work with. They will have identified a particular business plan or an opportunity, and they'll be focused on that. And then all of a sudden there's another opportunity, and that pivot in the business, how do you manage that while still kind of staying true to your purpose? And you've worked in a couple of businesses that have really strong sense of purpose.
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite understand the question. I mean, I think the purpose is like sort of a guiding sort of set of principles, and it's not really what your business plan is. It's kind of the way you're going to rock up, and what, if Steve Jobs talks about making a dent in the universe, it's what dent you're trying to make in the universe. And the more clear, the more kind of, and it comes from culture as well, or is linked to culture. So the clearer you are, and I'm sure some of the founders on the call will be so clear, you don't need to write it down. You don't. But Daina's absolutely right that as you get bigger, you do need to write it down. So Wagamama's purpose was, and then if you are clear on what your purpose is, then you can pivot to respond to different situations. So Wagamama's purpose was, and it still is about nourishment, emotional and physical nourishment, physical from the food, but emotional in terms of the sort of spirituality of sitting and eating over communal tables, and the way that we support young people. And when we were in the pandemic, we were shut. Our purpose hadn't changed, but we were shut. So you had to say, well, how do you deliver what you're supposed to do as a business when you're closed? And that's, then there were a couple of things. One, we pivoted to delivery. That was kind of the obvious thing to do. But there were some other non-obvious things to do, like open up our recipe book and encourage people to just cook Wagamama recipes at home. It made no money, but it helped them when they were at home struggling with lockdown, in terms of their emotional nourishment. So I think they're slightly different. A long-winded way of saying purpose is something kind of emotional and very, very specific to the business. And then there are growth plans that go alongside that, which help you deliver that depending on where you are, which I suppose is what you're asking me. I failed. But I just think as a founder, you just got to have that sort of sense of, and this is what Daina's talking about, of I'm here to do this, and we're going to do it in this way, and come hell or high water, we're going to do it. And that's what gets people out of bed. It's part of your culture. It's what will get you out of bed in the morning. But it's not just this. I think the bit is, it's not a bumper sticker, and it's not something that's just slapped on walls and people walk past. It has to drive your business.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly the point I was getting at, that actually your purpose doesn't change. The way you execute it might change, but actually if it's really your purpose, it doesn't change. I think it's really interesting what you're saying there, Emma, about how it comes into kind of culture, but it also comes into your own kind of personal I suppose your own personal drive. So Nadia, coming to you, because you're talking about kind of how you look after yourself, but when it's your purpose, when it's your business, how do you ensure that you can, I suppose, get other people along in that journey to take some of the weight off you, so that it's not just your purpose, it becomes, you know, the collective purpose of the organisation? Have you got any tips for how you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think actually it's sort of, I'm at the very start of my journey. I'm just starting something. So it's a question I should be thinking about a lot probably. But I think it really comes down to very good hiring. Like, you know, when we interview, often people are looking at the CV, where you went to university, what you've done. And I just think much more important are the values of the people. Like, why do they really want to work with you? You know, are you going to have a shared vision? And you know, I'm doing the U Effect, which is this mental health program. But the other thing I'm starting right now is a blockchain-based venture builder with 3 other partners, and we're all very different from very different backgrounds. And actually, we spent a huge amount of time thinking about why we are coming. It's called Silent Unicorn. Why we are coming together to create Silent, and it's actually kind of slide 1 in our deck. Like, why do we exist? And you know, for us, it's been really important that as and when we hire, that the people that we hire really sort of believe in those objectives. And it becomes much harder as you're getting bigger, and so I can't give you the answer to that. But right now for us, it's been very important to kind of handpick people that have the same values. And it's just interesting kind of hearing what Emma was saying, because to me actually, and this is probably because I never had a why, you know, I was a corporate lawyer and then investment management, and I never really stopped to think why. So now at this stage in my career when I'm starting out, the big thing driving me is the why. And that's what makes it exciting now. So I guess I come at it from a slightly different angle. Does that answer your question enough?
Yeah, it does. So I think, yeah, that point about having shared values, how do you work out whether a potential hire has the same values as you? Is it in the questions you ask? Is it from spending time with them? How do you kind of make that assessment? Because when you're hiring someone, you don't get very much time with them, do you, to sort of make these really big decisions?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at Silent, we're not hiring anyone that we don't know very, very well already. And I think that's not a scalable model, but I think it will help us to get to a stage where we are scalable. So everyone on the team has known kind of each other, or people we've hired for many, many years, and it's getting to know who people really are and whether they really fit with the culture. And I think in the early stage, that's very, very important. But I think you can ask people, and you know, you can ask them what drives them, and you can, you know, you can't tell it from one meeting, but spending time. I think multiple interviews is a good thing, and in different settings. So not just, you know, I'm in our office right now, not just in an office, but you know, go for lunch with them, maybe invite them to a drinks, or you know, something like that, where you get to have a real sense of who they are, rather than just the traditional kind of sit in an interview across a desk from somebody.
So how do we, you know, obviously International Women's Day is all about diversity and inclusion is, you know, part of its real drive. How do we marry up picking, you know, a team that has shared values with you, but also it being a diverse team? Because I think one of the challenges is that quite often the people who have the same values as you, or you perceive to have the same values as you, are actually a mirror image of you. So how do we do that, where we make sure we have those values, but we also are hiring, you know, in a diverse way? And I think making diverse hires can be really, really challenging, because, you know, is your pool of talent diverse before you even start? Emma, what are your thoughts on hiring diverse teams?
I mean, I think if you can afford it, you should get good HR advice. So I mean, very few people are skilled at recruitment or are skilled at interviewing, are skilled business leaders. You know, generally business leaders are either financial brains or they're customer brains. That doesn't make them extraordinary recruiters. And because of what Nadia talks about, you know, your people, and I think Daina talked about it as well, you know, really is about the people that you bring in. And I think that you just have to be, you kind of, first of all, you have to be big enough to accept, actually, I'm not that good at interviewing. I'm going to do what you've just described of employing my mates or employing people that I think are good. So that's where there are all sorts of good tools as well that you can use to kind of profile people. And I think you also have to decide what sort of culture you are. And where I've seen lots of things people go wrong is people want to work in entrepreneurial cultures because they think it's kind of like a badge of honor. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm working in this high growth company. But actually quite a few people prefer working in corporate companies which don't make decisions as quickly as entrepreneurial. And again, that's where you need HR folk to just really separate. Are you sure you want to be here? Are you sure you want to be in this environment? And I've seen that really senior levels, CEO level, CEOs coming going, I'm going to get my private equity fix and be a fantastic entrepreneurial CEO. And then 9 months later, they crawl back to their corporate world where they're massively successful. They're massively successful because that's the environment that they work in. So it's not to say that one world's better than the other. It's just. So I think if we're serious about diversity, we're going to need to use some tools and we're going to need to use some expertise. And there are good tools and there are good people you could use, but especially for senior hires like Nadia is talking about, headhunters are good. And they don't, especially on startups, they don't always charge silly rates. Find yourself a friendly headhunter who can help you.
I think that's good advice. It's also knowing where your gaps are and specifically targeting those, whether it's neurodiversity or diversity of a kind of background and culture, which you can ask headhunters to do. Find me someone who doesn't look like me, and give me the opportunity to talk to them. Daina, do investors really care about diverse teams? Or is it something that really they want to see when you're pitching to them, or is this something that is a tick box? What's your experience?
I really do care. I'm an investor, so I think there is an increasing amount of investors who do really care. And actually, in my old job, I used to do due diligence on other PE funds because I was investing both directly and via funds. And I was constantly looking who are the managing partners and investment teams, what percentage, not just about gender, but about kind of backgrounds, race, religion, everything. And I mean, things are pretty stark and bad, but it is improving. And I would say that, BGF has put it on top of our priority list in terms of backing more diverse founders. When I have prioritized reaching out to female founders. And I guess when you decide whom your capacity is always limited, when do I take a call or meeting? And I would almost positively discriminate to make sure that we can back more female founders. And I think Scale Up Institute actually published a report yesterday which said that we are the most active investor in female founders in UK, but it takes lots of not just work, but initiative. And it's not easy because when you look at the pool of people or even founders coming through, it's no secret most of them are entirely either male teams or mixed, but we really need to do our bit to make sure we get more fair representation.
And I think what's interesting for investors, because obviously there's so much information about how diverse teams are higher performing teams, and that is just a fact now. It's been proven empirically. But actually, you need diversity of investment, don't you? Because your portfolio needs to be diversified. You need to be backing different teams in order for you to get the best, returns for your business as well.
Yeah, exactly. And also, there's, as you say, lots of evidence. I think I was looking at stats a few months ago where 70 to 80% of actually purchasing decisions are made by women, either through their influence, not just personal purchasing power. Yet when you look at who runs businesses in terms of exec management teams, boards, it's so skewed towards male. And actually, I think that it makes sense. You need to have a diverse decision making if you're gonna sell to customers who are mostly female. So yeah. I think it's super important. It does affect returns. And again, there is increasing amount of evidence that more diverse teams deliver better results and create more value. So I think every investor should think about it.
Yeah, well, I think that's very good advice. And interesting, just picking up on another theme is you talking about your priorities. So you have identified as a business that this is something you need to do, and you've made it your number one priority, and it's affecting obviously your business decisions. So I think, Nadia, you talked about personal prioritization. How do you prioritize and delegate? So you talked about quarterly meetings, and I suppose having like a structure that forces you as a business to prioritize. What are your personal tips for how you prioritize, your day, your week? What do you do to kind of keep your priorities? Do you have vision boards? Do you kind of, look at your tasks and order them by your priorities? What are those really practical things that you do to prioritize, your day and your, the tasks that fall on your kind of list?
Yeah, and I think this is so personal because everyone works so differently. But I think this idea of a quarterly meeting where you get kind of, the brains in the company to come together and strategize what actually really matters to us this quarter. So for me, with Q1, it's sort of like setting up the company structure, creating a deck, all of this sort of like initial stuff before you even start thinking about kind of, okay, how am I going to get customers? Or it's sort of really breaking up into stages. And then every week I literally just look at that. And I do everything handwritten. I'm like a, terrible kind of scribbler on bits of scrap paper. But I look at the kind of bigger structure and say, okay, within that, what is manageable for this week? And so, yeah, it's probably something that a lot of people do, but I just come back to the lists. I'm trying to do less lists because I think sometimes the lists are really overwhelming. But I think having at least 3 or 4 things just to guide you is really important. But this one is very, very personal. I have other people in my team. We have something called Jira, like Jira boards, and another guy who literally just puts everything in his calendar that he needs to do, kind of blocking out times. I like the traditional lists.
And Emma, how do you make sure that you're doing things, that the things that you are doing are the right things, and that the things that should be delegated are delegated? How do you ensure that that you're putting things in the right place, I suppose?
I guess my personal, sorry, Emma.
No, you go.
Go for it.
Katie, did you mean Emma or Daina? Maybe my hearing.
Daina, you go first, and then we're going to hear from Emma because you've both got something to say on this.
Cool. I guess my personal learning over the years has been really learning to say no. Because I think as you build your career, you are trying to be helpful to everybody. You care so deeply what other people think about you. You are trying to do everything. And I have family with kids. I have career. I have lots of things going in my life. And nobody is perfect. Nobody can do everything. And I think, yes, I do have a list on my OneNote in terms of what I want to achieve this year, what I need to do this week and this month. But of course, I mean, as an investor, you get constant inbound, huge amounts of inbound. And I think learning to say no, just to really be in charge of your diary and actually be in charge of what Nadia said, to have at least as minimum amount of possible. But I mean, you need to have some time for self-care, because otherwise you'll become less effective if you can't restore yourself, and actually you become less efficient, and then you're permanently tired and it can just backfire. So I think, yeah, my single biggest learning or advice would be learn to say no to things which matter less.
What about you, Emma?
Well, I'm quite lucky in that I grew up in a business which had this rhythm already around kind of monthly, annual planning, monthly updates, and sort of this sort of cycle of the business. I think it must be much harder for some of the people who are doing startups, because you have to create that. But I would encourage you to create that, because structure is important for people. And actually, the more entrepreneurial you are, probably the less you'll need structure, but your teams will need structure. So I have always, when I've been in an executive position, always tried to make sure that there's a real clear, what I call rhythms and routines of the business. And for me, one of the things that was always really important was what I called the Monday morning huddle, which was about 9:15, where you kind of go, right, part of it is about touching base with everyone emotionally, but part of it is to Nadia's point, what's on everyone's to-do list, what we're shooting for. But that was also slightly different from a monthly review of performance, or a budget setting process, or an offsite on strategy. When you get to be a board advisor, there are also quite clear rhythms and routines. And one of my challenges now is for me to think, how do I make sure I prepare myself so I can be really useful in these meetings that might be 3 or 4 weeks down the track? Because, it's not a case of just sitting there and reading the board papers and then turning up. You've got to have thought about the issues, you've got to talk to people, you've got to have done work. So it's different. But I mean, Nadia is right. You should find your own way of organising your time, and everybody will be different. And my contribution to it is bring structure, because other people will need it, and it will help you run the business.
I think that's really interesting, that even if you're not a structured person or you don't like structure, that idea that the team needs it, because as you say, Emma, they need to know what's expected of them, and you need to be able to rely on them to deliver in the times that you want them to, because I think that can be a challenge. If you're founding a business, you're running at a million miles an hour, and you need to know that the team knows when they have to deliver things by, and that, as you say, they have that routine of this is what's expected of me, so that you don't have to remember it. Because of course, the minute you put the structure in place, it takes away that thing you have to think about, that I have to remind so and so that they've got to tell me what's going on this day, because then it happens. So I like that idea of building in structure. We've talked a little bit about personal resilience. I think the lockdown and the enforced working in a certain way has meant for a lot of people that it's been very, very intense. That intensity, obviously lots of fast growing businesses work remotely, and so the idea of everyone not being in an office together all the time, I think was not particularly alien to a lot of founders, a lot of fast growing businesses. But most fast growing businesses would come together from time to time anyway, even if it wasn't the sort of five days a week, 9 to 5 that corporates had. And obviously, COVID and lockdown meant that everyone was forced to be at home all of the time. And I think a lot of that increased the intensity of working, that you were sort of stuck behind the screen, with nowhere to go but to work. And, that's been great for many businesses because they've grown faster, but also, how you then protect yourself personally is difficult. So it's interesting, Nadia, you were talking about that 10 minutes at the start of your day. I actually find the commute is my downtime, which I now love commuting in a way that I didn't before. But for me, that's the break between work and a very busy home life. Daina, what for you is how do you build your own resilience and look up? And you're very busy.
I have found that I need usually a form of exercise which allows me to actually switch off my brain. And I have found it in actually swimming. So I tried to swim with actually in a swimming class with usually 7-10 other ladies, and it's kind of stamina swimming. I have known how to swim all my life, but I mean, I also run. But when you run, I still think about deals and work. Whereas when you swim, and especially if it's structured swimming, where they say, okay, now do 3 laps, and you need to learn this front crawl technique, this is a breathing exercise. You just think about breathing and how you get from one end of the pool to the next. You don't have your phone, you can't pretty much speak to anybody. You just need to think about breathing and how you actually go in the water and come out. And I have found it so precious because you just switch off your brain. And I guess other people might find it a meditation or anything. But yeah, I mean, I love running, but even in running, I can't really switch off my brain. So swimming is something I've found which works when I just think about breathing and swimming and nothing else.
So I think what's interesting is there's much more conversation nowadays about founders protecting their own mental state. I think, when 5 years ago, the sort of the rhetoric was, as a founder, you just push, and you keep going. Whereas now there seems to be much more recognition of the fact that as a founder, you've got to have that resilience, you've got to build your own personal sustainability. Why do you think that rhetoric has changed, Daina?
I think that, with what's happening in the world, I think in terms of preventative health and resilience has just become on top of everybody's agenda, because I mean, everybody has realized what can go wrong, and very quickly what can go wrong if it's not in place. So I mean, even when I look at across our portfolio companies, the amount of how many of them now have mental health support apps on demand, help needed. I mean, it's just so crucial, because essentially you almost don't know what you're missing until things go wrong. And I mean, you don't need to even think about what's happening in Ukraine or what happened in COVID. I think we have started living in an environment where you have such volatility and unpredictability that I think mental health and resilience is more important than ever. And I just think that it's no longer nice to have. It affects so many people that it's almost a hygiene factor, and you need to prioritize it.
Katie, can I actually just chip in on that as well? Because I think it's so interesting. Something that I've been really strict on now is I don't work weekends ever, and I really try not to work late into the evenings as well. And you know, probably a few years ago, as you say, that would have been thought of as weak or not, you know, being committed enough. But fundamentally, I think, why are any of us doing what we're doing? Like, why are we building these careers or these businesses? And I'm definitely someone who loves what I do, but I also want to live. I want to spend time with my family doing things I love. And you know, especially in my first career doing M&A at Slaughters, there was just no time for any of that. And you have to stop as a founder and think, wait, I'm putting everything in, but why? Like, if I don't ever get to see my friends, or I'm, you know, canceling on my mum's birthday, then like, what is this all about? And again, I think it's very different. You know, some people might not be close to their family or not want to see their friends, but you have to work out why you're doing it and make sure that you create the time and space for that. Because I just think that's the most important thing.
And Emma, you've talked about inclusive cultures. Can you see a link between this and, you know, inclusivity? Oh, she's struggling with the mute button. We'll come back to you, Emma. You can once you've got over your technical glitch, we'll come back to that. But I certainly I think that's an interesting thing. Can we talk about what you do when it goes wrong? And this is something, I mean, I like to focus on the positive, but what do you do when it goes wrong, when the team isn't working, when you know, the culture isn't quite right? You know, what do you do to kind of pull things back? Nadia, have you got any kind of tips on that?
And I think, by the way, this is an absolute, it's a when, it's not an if. Like, things are going to go wrong, and that's part of getting things right, you know. So actually, it's not a case of, oh my goodness, this is a disaster, the team isn't working, or this sale didn't go through, whatever it might be. I think it's all about how you approach things. And so, you know, anytime things aren't going as we want, we stop and we say, okay, why is that happening? You know, why isn't it? And you have to strategize. And I think the most important thing is not to panic. Often we panic, we make rash decisions, we think we've failed. It's strategizing, and we look forward. Like, how, it's always about asking the right questions, like, not, oh my goodness, it's a disaster, but like, how can we turn this around? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again? What did we do wrong? And you know, I think Anne was talking about the transparency and being able to feel like you're in a culture where you can be transparent and say the things that went wrong, so that people feel safe to move kind of to the correct place going forward. And I think a big thing for anyone that's successful, and if you haven't read this book by Angela Duckworth, you should. It's called Grit. But she essentially says the most successful people are the ones that are passionate about what they do, but that they persevere. And persevering isn't, oh, I tried, but it didn't work. Persevering is you try and you get knocked down and you get told you're rubbish and you lose all your money and everyone tells you you're doing the wrong thing, and you still keep going. And so I think when the things go wrong, just having that fire in you to keep going and keep approaching it in as calm and positive a way as you can is a thing that definitely really has helped me. But you've got to keep going. That's the difference between the successful people and the people that don't make it. It's not the talent, it's not the ability. I think it's just they literally keep going.
And Emma, you talked a bit about that psychological safety, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to get back to your last question because I think it links. I mean, one of the things that's really important in a business is your relationships. So it kind of goes back to this question of, are people happy? But really, you need, especially at your top team, to have really big relationships and really open relationships. You need to invest in them. So one of the things we did as a team was we had like a team psych, and we had team coaching, and we would go off. And that was a way actually of relieving some of the pressure in the system. But also it was a way of us strengthening those relationships, because those relationships will get tested when you are in a difficult time, and you've got to be able to go, look guys, this isn't working, or this bit's not working, why do you think it is, without people feeling defensive or marginalized or And that's all to do with the size of in my view, to do with the size of the relationships. So yeah, I think that they're all a bit linked, aren't they? And it goes back to, again, the point I made at this, or somebody made, was about culture is something you work at, you nurture. And I think the quality of the relationships, and you see it in all teams. You see it in sports teams, the sports teams that work well together, the ones that can kind of communicate with each other and talk and work through difficult times. I mean, what's happening at the moment with the Chelsea football team is really quite interesting. I think they'll either do absolutely brilliantly as a function of this extraordinary situation they're in, or they'll do very badly. But I think we're going to see, I suspect it'll be very brilliantly, because I think they've got a very good coach who's really communicating, who's really bringing them together. I'm not a Chelsea football supporter, by the way, I should say. Liverpool all the way, Liverpool FC. I mean, I think if you're interested in teams, it's interesting to watch what's happening to them at the moment. So invest in, so as well as investing in good HR folk, I would invest in some form of some team coaching or a coach, because actually that will help you and your team as you go through difficult times.
Oh, I completely echo that. I mean, I've had coaching and it was transformational for me, personally transformational. I think actually in terms of kind of my work output, probably, not much changed, but in terms of how I felt about my career and about how I felt about, what I was going to achieve, it was unbelievably transformational. So I'm always in favour of coaching. And I think what was really interesting for me, and the thing I really learned from coaching, which is, feeds into what we've been talking about, is that sustainability of, you can't keep going at the same rate that you're going for the rest of your life. You're going to fall over, and actually you need to work out what are the things you do which are effective, and what are the things which are just noise, which take up a lot of time and energy, and actually are not moving you forward, and concentrate on the things that work and do those and ditch all the rest, so that you're building something that's sustainable. I thought, Emma, it was really interesting you talking about surveying your staff after the George Floyd murder and all of the Black Lives Matter protests. You're asking really difficult questions there, questions that actually I think a lot of people would shy away from. So what I really took from that is actually don't just ask the questions that the nice questions, ask the really hard questions as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's also about asking hard questions. I think you just have to be prepared to listen to the answer, even questions about, do you enjoy coming to work, and do you feel valued, and do you feel supported? If you give people the opportunity to actually write with some candor about what they're feeling, you'll probably find some richness in that. Again, kind of comes back to structure, create some sort of structure for that, which I think this idea of sort of saying we're going to do it once a year, or we're going to do it twice a year, so people know that they've got this opportunity, and we really want to hear what you want to say, because we really want to build a better environment to work in. We've done it in 3 or 4 businesses I've been involved in. It's always helps us move forward, even if some bits are kind of not as good as we thought they were.
I think the key is you were talking about acting on what you've heard. So it's not just that you listen, but you act on it, you make changes, you publicize the fact that you are doing something, so that people feel that what they have to say is taken into account, because that's got to be part of that process, hasn't it? If you don't do anything, you don't make any changes, people are going to think, well, what was the point in that? Okay, so we've got a couple of questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask some of these. So we've got some questions about fundraising. So Daina, I'm going to come to you on this. So obviously we've touched a little bit on how, we're in uncertain times. We've been in uncertain times for the last 2 years, but particularly on a kind of global macroeconomic perspective, the invasion of Ukraine is having, ripples outside of the humanitarian crisis. There's an impact on business, there's an impact on rising prices. We're in this really uncertain time. How do you reassure investors that when things are so uncertain, there is, I suppose, certainty in them investing in your business?
It's a very good question and very, I guess, current in terms of investment strategy. I mean, not just BJF, we are evergreen investors. So we invest throughout economic downturns, through crisis, and even in the middle of lockdowns, I completed multiple deals. We keep investing. Obviously, it's how do you prioritize and which business models you back. And there is plenty of business models which actually are benefiting from, not necessarily benefiting from uncertainty, but where you can see long-term value creation no matter what cycle we are in. So I think it's about being basically able to position your business. First of all, being honest, saying this is a crisis. For example, I recognize that costs, for example, will likely go up. These are the supply chain challenges. For example, this is how I'm dealing with them. So I guess being aware and being, I guess, honest, but having at least a plan how you are going to deal with it would definitely help. And then I guess being able to be flexible in terms of, I mean, many businesses I look after are e-commerce and they ship worldwide. So when Brexit happened and when then logistics costs were exploded, many of them had to bring supply chains more near shore. Similarly, I now see obviously huge cost inflation going through food and beverage industry, and since there's lots of talks that if Ukraine loses 2 harvests, there will be a ripple effect, which we haven't even seen yet in terms of food cost inflation. And then it's, well, essentially, depending how much your business is affected, to actually be aware of it and do the research and have a plan what you are going to do about it, because most investors' jobs is actually to keep investing. So we have the capital to deploy. So we actually need to find opportunities where to invest. It's not the case that where we just I don't know, could just sit on it and do nothing for 2 years. I mean, some months maybe could, but there's plenty of investors out there who want to invest and will keep investing.
So I'm taking from that, be upfront and have a solution to the problem so that you're kind of addressing it as a whole if you can.
Yeah, I think the worst answer you could probably give is like, no, like basically, I think it'll be fine. And like, I just think be honest, and actually, even if it appears to be more risky, I think that investors appreciate you being aware and have done the research and yeah, having at least solution you have thought about.
Katie, I think a big thing on, sorry. I was going to say, I think a big thing on fundraising as well is you have to really know who you're speaking to. You know, not all investors are created equally. And so, you know, this particular climate might be very, very bad for someone you've been having very advanced conversations with. So you have to think, what are their particular concerns? You know, as Daina said, the flip side is for some people, this is, you know, a great time and they've got capital to invest. And so you have to make sure that you always do the work to understand who's sitting across you at the table. Because sometimes the best thing is just leave it for 2 months. I think if you're too pushy at the wrong moment, then it never bodes well either. So put that time in to work out who the people that you're asking for money are and what they actually care about.
That's a good tip as well. And Emma, you know, with all this uncertainty in the world, there's also uncertainty for your staff as well and your kind of customers. How do you handle that? Do you think it's the same techniques that you're kind of upfront about the difficulties, but try and present a solution as well?
Well, I think if you look at lots of business, I'm involved in a lot of leisure businesses. I mean, this is kind of year 6 of various crises. You know, there was a Brexit crisis, then there was a COVID crisis, and now which has kind of gone on. You know, we thought we were coming out, then we went back in, and we thought we went back in a number of times in terms of lockdowns, and then there's clearly this absolutely awful events unfolding in Ukraine, which will have a massive impact on cost of goods and ultimately on consumer confidence. I think one of the things that's happened, because we've been hit by so many kind of external events, that actually good leadership teams stay calm. You know, I don't know how awful the food inflation is going to be, especially if the second harvest is. And I do sit on a lot of the calls trying to update, but I think you kind of respond with what you can do. And actually, you know, it's really important if you're leading a business, and I'm not now, I'm just advising, is that you are still really positive and inspiring and give people confidence. And the whole point about culture and communication and all those good things, because we're blessed to be in the UK. We all still do have jobs and security. For the people who are running businesses, I think it's about getting up and being as positive as you possibly can be and staying as calm as you can be. And we'll see. The events will unfold. And Daina is right, is that good businesses will survive this event that we're about to unfold. I mean, they may not make as much money over the next few years, but they will survive. And so really, being clear on what you're offering, having fantastic teams, making sure customers are satisfied, those sort of things are things you should double down on. It's average businesses that will fail in any sort of economic event, in my view. Daina would have the evidence, but that's my view.
I think it's also about, we've been talking about that sustainability, haven't we? Having sustainable growth, because if you've built a sustainable model and something that you think is going to last the test of time, is not a business that's sort of here today, gone tomorrow. Actually, you should be able to ride out some of these blips as they're occurring. So it kind of feeds into that sustainability as well. Another question we've had from the audience is around storytelling, which Daina, you touched on, and the importance of being able to kind of convey your story, which links into having a purpose and having that identified, because if you've got your purpose identified, then that feeds into your storytelling. The specific question is, what are the key messages to hit when you're telling your story to investors? What are kind of those points that you've really got to get right?
It's kind of basic. I think about it. It's like what you're doing, why, and how. It needs to be actually very simple. And for me, it's like any founder pitching for investment, I think, needs to explain in like 2-3 sentences what business is all about. Sometimes they just go on for 10 minutes, and 10 minutes in, you still don't understand quite what the business does. And like, you obviously will come across different investors with very different experience, but I think it's actually very important to keep it simple and to be able to distill that great purpose or great knowledge you have, even if you are a PhD in engineering and have invented the most amazing things ever. I think you need to be able to explain it in a very simple way, which resonates with people, and just explain what you're doing, why, and how you are gonna basically make it and scale it up.
Great, thank you. Nadia, another question we've had is about how you look after your team, but we're not talking periodically, we're talking day by day. How do you actively look after your team on a day by day basis? Is that about checking in with them? Is it, what are those kind of tools that you use to check that your team is doing okay?
Yeah, and that's a really good question as well. And I think so much of it comes back to creating the right culture in the first place. Because if you have a culture where people feel supported, then there aren't necessarily active steps every day. But something we're doing is, so in this quarterly, we do an on-site quarterly, and the idea is to get everyone together to do something really fun. And in that, we do the priorities, we do the what worked, what didn't work, and we also do the what can we do to support you. And what I found super interesting is in the what worked and didn't work, lots of people had things to say. In the priorities, people had lots of things to say. And in the what we can do to support you, nobody said anything. And I found that phenomenal, because I was like, this is meant to be the most interesting, fun bit. But people almost, and this is like month 1 for me, by the way, so it's very new, but I was sort of blown away, because I was like, I've got like 100 things, but I can't say it because I'm at the front writing it on the whiteboard. But I just think creating a culture where people know and feel that you care. And something I said after that how we support you session is, I said, I want you to come to me and tell me, what kind of things will help. And as Emma said, nobody has. And so what I'm trying to do is create like one-on-ones where we check in, where we have like sort of, if it's not in person, a virtual coffee, and just try and get a sense of people, and maybe even make suggestions to them. Oh, you've got to pick your child up at 4 o'clock. You know what? Why don't you just leave early on a Thursday, or whatever it is, so that you can be a bit proactive about thinking about how you can support your team. Also, something we're trying to do is like a weekly we've been thinking about having a weekly kind of therapist coach. We don't have the budget to do this for everyone yet, but we're kind of do something weekly, which is meditation. It's from this amazing Tibetan meditation expert. If anyone wants his details, definitely get in touch afterwards. But we're trying to do something every week that focuses the team on their own well-being. So it's the two things of creating the culture where people feel supported, maybe making one-on-one time for them. It's not every day, but maybe once a month you go for a coffee and you get a sense of people and you suggest things. And then the third thing of doing something as a team very often. So we have the quarterly on-site and then the weekly sort of non-work related, fun, meditative, or whatever you want to call it, exercise. But it's a really good question, and I think I really liked what Emma said on this, the periodic check-ins and the surveys. I literally wrote that down. I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. We're doing a survey. So so thanks for that, Emma.
Well, actually, Emma, I think this is probably going to be our last question. We've got a question which I wanted to put to you, which has been asked by the audience. Where you've got a small organisation, how do you get that honest feedback when the organisation is so small that actually whatever feedback they give can be easily tied back to an individual? How do you create that culture of actually you can tell me what you really think and it's going to be okay when the organisation is so small?
I mean, it's much harder, and actually most of the businesses I've led are much bigger than that. But I've seen really good feedback done by just having an independent person who then interviews everybody and then brings the feedback back. And because what's the purpose of feedback? It's generally not to go, oh, he was mean to me. It's generally to help improve the situation. So if it's done in that sort of spirit of trust, it can be really helpful. So we've used one of the businesses I've been involved in, we've used again a sort of, I suppose, an ex-headhunter or somebody like that, and they're quite qualified to ask questions. They're quite qualified to kind of get out what's behind the answer to something and say, well, really, why has that affected you? And then they write a report, after 3 or 4 interviews. So I would always try and find a way to do it independently, whether it's through a survey or through somebody interviewing. And clearly, if you don't want your feedback to be heard at all, that's probably an example of something not working. Something's going wrong. It feels like that smacks of a toxic culture. If that's the case,
I think
my suggestion would be leave. You don't want to work in toxic cultures. If you're in a small place. You really don't.
For fast-growing businesses who don't have the budget for someone independent, could they use their non-execs or their kind of advisory board?
Yeah, they probably could. They probably could. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's using those, thinking laterally and using, taking the principle, but using the resources that you have available to do that. And of course, that is the role of a non-exec, is to be that kind of questioning person, who's going to sort of take the truth to power. So I think a non-exec could perhaps provide some of that support for if you can't afford to engage someone externally. Well, I think we are at the end of our allotted time, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to come to your question. Apologies. It's been such an interesting discussion. I've personally taken quite a lot away from it. I particularly, I think it's really interesting, the sort of how it all links in together. All the things you've been talking about really interrelate. And I think if you can get one of them right, I think it then leads on to getting the others right. So that gives me a lot of confidence that you just need to start somewhere, don't you? And then hopefully it all sort of falls into place. But fantastic to hear from all of you. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to Joanna, who couldn't be with us live, but gave us her input, and really interesting that the three of you were picking up on some of the same themes as her as well. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed the session today. It's been lovely to be able to do this event with All Together, who I think are brilliant at being able to bring those senior voices for the benefit of people who are sort of starting out in their journeys, and lovely to celebrate International Women's Day, which is something that's very close to my heart personally, and I know to lots of the people who are listening. So thank you all very much, and I hope we get to join for another event soon. Thank you.